Our story today is about someone who carries the light. And it's a story that's probably familiar to you, the parable of the Good Samaritan. And the reason that we hear this story over and over again is this is how we strengthen the light in each other. We encourage each other to carry the light by telling this story. And as with other parables, I've encouraged us all to think about what another title might be. Now, a title for this, a simple one, that's perhaps a little more explanatory of what's going on, might be The Righteous Man, because the Samaritan is a righteous man. Or perhaps because of the context of the story, you might call this The Good Neighbor. Now, the story begins with a question. The story is a way of Jesus illustrating the answer to a question that a lawyer asks. Now, the lawyer comes up to Jesus a little bit earlier and says, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" So this guy isn't just asking about, what should I do to be a good guy? He is asking about, what do I do to inherit eternal life? And the answer Jesus gives, which most of you probably learned in Sunday school, is to love God with your heart, your mind, your soul, and your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. You do this, you're in. It's a pretty big order, isn't it? So the lawyer is probably thinking that, okay, well, who's my neighbor? Now, the lawyer's not a dumb guy. He knows that in the Bible, in the Old Testament, everybody's your neighbor. You don't get to avoid being compassionate. But when the assignment is so big, to love your neighbor as yourself, surely we can chisel it down a little bit so it's doable. Who's my neighbor? Who do I have to pay all this attention to? Now, we might feel like the lawyer is trying to get off the hook. But think about it. On his way to work, who does he see? Someone with a handout. Someone sleeping in a doorway. Someone drunk on the street. When he hears the headlines in the morning papers, there's a natural disaster somewhere, and people in India or Mexico have had a terrible earthquake and need money and relief supplies. Or there's a war going on, and there are refugees, and there's famine, and there's diseases. Every day in the newspaper, we can be inundated by the need for compassion around the world. And then you look at your mail, your bulk mail or your email, and there's requests again for money, for political prisoners, for those who are unjustly imprisoned, to find a cure for cancer, to help abused children, to build a shelter for homeless families. Again, wonderful causes, all of which need our help, but which can be overwhelming. Who is my neighbor? Who do I pay attention to first in this long list of things that I have to deal with? And then there's my family. Perhaps there are children, or extended family, elderly parents, others in the family who need our help, who don't have children. Who is my neighbor is not an unreasonable question, because to do all of this sounds like economic, emotional, and physical exhaustion, doesn't it? Who is my neighbor? And we wish that Jesus just gave them a simple list. Well, this is what you do first, this is what you do second, and if you have time left over, this is what you could do third. But no, Jesus doesn't do that. He tells the story of the Good Samaritan. And in this story, there are only 3 characters. And the first 2 are a priest and a Levite. And they are going down the same road as this poor soul who has been beaten. And you can't tell whether he's alive or dead, lying by the side of the road. This is a dangerous road that is described here. People avoided it if they could. It was always full of bandits and terrible things. It was not very well policed. They didn't really have police. So you were taking your chances going down this road. And of course, you wouldn't go down this road unless you really had to. So we can assume that all the travelers on this road had an important mission that they were trying to accomplish. And in the midst of it, they find someone in need. So now the priest and the Levite both are described to us by their titles so that we understand something about their jobs. Priests and Levites both worked in the temple. Priests doing what priests do, which means running the service and saying the prayers and helping people worship. But the Levites also worked in the temple. And their job was to be assistants, really. But to work in the temple at that time, and still, in many cases, it's a very holy thing to do. So you were expected to be pure in certain ways. And again, according to the customs and the laws, the religious laws of the time, there were certain things, if you did them, made you ineligible to enter the temple, and even more, to work within the temple and to handle holy objects. One of those things was contact with corpses. And so here's this guy lying by the side of the road. We don't know whether he's dead or alive. And another thing that could keep you from working in the temple was contact with Gentiles. And remember how Jesus gets in trouble because he's eating with Gentiles? It's because of that law. That this kind of contact made you ineligible to work in the temple. So when the priest and the Levite come along, they're probably having to make a very difficult choice between one duty, to work in the temple, and another duty, to take care of someone in need. How do you choose? These aren't cold-hearted, irresponsible people. They're trying to figure out, how do I behave in this situation in a responsible way? So they choose what is reasonable and what is cautious. Now, I think we can all relate to this. It's easy for us when we are confronted by someone in need, whether it's someone who is asking us for a battery jump, or someone who's asking for money on the street, or someone who has a very reasonable appeal to us. What are my responsibilities to my family? How much can I afford to give away? How much is reasonable to give away? You know, if I give it away, will it be used for the purpose that I think it should be used? You know, is the person on the street going to spend it on drugs, or is the organization I send it to really going to use it for what they say they're going to use it for, or the administrator's going to become fat cats? We can ask ourselves a million questions, can't we? That's the problem for all of us, is by the time we're finished asking all the questions, we don't do anything. We don't even give a quarter, because we have talked ourselves out of it. And I think that's part of what Jesus is getting at. Do something. It doesn't just get beyond our questions and our rationalizations and our trying to figure it out, and do something. Of course, the Good Samaritan does more than just give a quarter. He goes way, way beyond what most people who are cautious could do. He takes the chance of going over to someone. You know, maybe the guy lying on the side of the road is someone who's playing a game so that if you went over and helped him, his buddies would come and attack you and get your money. So maybe he's not for real there. Or perhaps the Good Samaritan then does more than just help him. He binds his wounds up, he puts him on the donkey, takes him to the inn, pays for his care, offers to come back. He goes all the way, does everything he possibly can to make sure that this guy will recover. And he is the one that Jesus is obviously trying to encourage us to imitate. But there's another twist in this story, a twist that perhaps some of you know. He's described as the Good Samaritan. And we don't think much about that. But in Jesus' time, saying the Good Samaritan was kind of like someone saying the good Taliban or the good terrorist. A Samaritan was, for most Jews, something that you could never imagine anything good coming out of.